discipleship in a very particular way. And so we're just going to do a very quick review of what we've been talking about, because it's good to always review, before we move on to this a little bit more newness as well to conclude this Disciples on the Way, Part 1 that we're doing. We'll be having another one of these in January when we're going to focus on ministry in our parish as well as our outreach beyond these walls as well. So again, we're all disciples on the way by our baptism. Every one of us here in this parish or whatever parish you belong to, we are walking with Jesus. And of course, disciples on the way, there are 4 important components. You need to discover Jesus first, or rediscover him. That's what the Alpha experiences are happening right now downstairs. There's an Alpha going on right now after the 8:30 Mass, which then, of course, leads us to follow Jesus, worship Jesus, and then, of course, to share Jesus. And during this month of September, we've been focusing on that second one of following Jesus. Every one of us is on a journey, and we're all on different parts of that journey. Some of us are just starting, others of us are well along the way in our relationship with Jesus Christ. But hopefully we all recognize that we're weak as human beings and that we do need Jesus. And he is the only way. The world presents us many other ways, but Jesus is the only way. And the only way to Jesus, of course, is what we've been focusing on, 2 things, prayer as well as our lifelong learning, all part of being a disciple. We need to pray every day. That's an absolute given. If we're not, we need to start doing it. And we also need to open our minds, our hearts, to learning more about our faith. It just can't stop when we graduate from high school or when we're confirmed. And so our invitation today, which sort of ties into our readings as well, is all about a generous spirit. Generosity. I'm not talking about the money kind of generosity, because we know that generosity takes on many different shapes and forms. And we need to be generous. We're focusing on prayer, as well as our own faith formation. We need to be generous with our time. We need to be a person of prayer. We need to be a lifelong learner of our faith. Now, time, we know, is a very precious commodity in our lives. The first thing we can't do, sometimes we make you say this, I'll make time. I don't know of any human being who can make time. It just can't be done, okay? You can find time, but you can't make it. So we do need to find that time. We need to be generous in our time with prayer, as well as our own time in learning more about our faith as well. And it has to go beyond just the 1 hour that we're here every week. If we feel that that's my fulfillment to God, is I came to Mass for 1 hour a week, which I'm very happy that you're here, but that's absolute minimalism. That's scary. You don't want to go down that road of minimalism. You know, I sometimes wonder about the minimalism, you know, when people are rushing out the doors right after communion, or maybe coming in always late. You know, where's our sense of where God is in my life? And we have to be serious about that. We have to think about that. Am I being a minimalist with my time for God, even here for worship? Our gospel story today, as well as our first reading from the book of Numbers, tells us about the generosity of God, the generosity of that Spirit that's there. You know, Joshua, Moses' assistant, was grumbling because a couple of people received the Spirit who were outside of the camp. And Moses is basically saying is, God is very generous. Stop complaining. And the same thing kind of happened in the gospel today. John the Apostle comes to Jesus and said there's a few disciples who are not of our group. They don't walk with us, but they're preaching in your name. You need to stop them. They're not with us. And Jesus makes that wonderful response and saying, well, if they're not against me, then they're with us. right? God is generous. And God is generous in so many other ways in our life. All we got to do is dwell upon that every day, which we should in our prayer life, to recognize how thankful we need to be, how generous God is to us. But He's inviting us to do the same thing. If God is generous to us, we need to mirror that back to God by our generosity to others as well. Now, certainly that generosity is all over the Scriptures, and certainly in the Gospel, but we also see that generosity in the lives of the many, many saints that the Church is blessed with, the many holy men and women. And today I'm just going to focus briefly on this one particular saint, because he does have a local connection here, right here in Appleton. And that, of course, is Blessed Solanus Casey, who a year ago was beatified. He's now elevated. He's not a saint yet. He probably is. But he's at that next level. He's a blessed, and the next step will be he will become a saint. But he's a rather curious example. Maybe you know a little bit about his life already, but it's always good to see a little bit more about him. First of all, he was born right here in Wisconsin, way back in 1870. You know, back in the days of the Wild West. Probably in 1870, most of the state was still covered by great forest, you know, Little House in the Big Woods times as well. And he died in Michigan, Detroit, in 1957, in which a number of us were probably already alive at that time. So he's rather contemporary. He comes from a farming family right here in Wisconsin. And it was that pioneering spirit in that time period that led him to travel around the Wild West with all sorts of interesting adventures in his own life, taking on many different jobs as he was discerning his call to the priesthood. But all through that, he was a very generous person with his time, in his prayer, as well as with his dealing with others as well. One of his jobs brought him into contact with two rather infamous gunfighters who belonged to the Jesse James gang, Jim and Cole Younger. And sort of Solanus kind of took them under his wing for a while. His kindness to them, his generosity of his time to them, so impressed these two brothers that they actually gave him a present, a clothing trunk, which that future priest, Solanus Casey, and future saint on the way, would use when he traveled and eventually would enter the seminary as well. Eventually, to make a long story short, Solanus Casey joined the Capuchin Friars, the Franciscans. He was ordained in 1904, and he said his very first Mass, not too far from here, over at St. Joseph's Parish, just down the street from here, sort of on the edge of downtown Appleton. Now, because he was not intellectually the brightest person, but he certainly was bright in many, many other ways, it's disqualified him from preaching as a priest and also from hearing confessions. But that didn't discourage him at all as a simplex priest, as they called priests back then, who were not intelligent enough maybe to grasp the Latin and everything else, but nonetheless, they were recognized for their holiness in their lives. And so he spent the next 50 years of his life as a priest, most of that time working as a porter or a doorkeeper in the various parishes that the Capuchin Fathers administered to, whether that be in Harlem or in Detroit as well. He would welcome the poor, the homeless, as well as those who were well off. Whoever came to the parish in need, he always had time for them. He was very generous with his time. Very soon, he also gained a reputation as a healer. He started attracting many, many people from different religious backgrounds, Protestants, Jews, as well as Catholics. And as his reputation spread, people came to him by the thousands, looking for comfort, advice, as well as inner healing. Of course, with all those thousands coming to him, and he wasn't getting younger, those growing demands began to wear him out. a grueling day of counseling, so many people coming to see him, he would oftentimes fall asleep right on the floor of his office, or even in church, right before the Blessed Sacrament. Or he might be found at 2 or 3 in the morning, trying to wind down the day by either praying, or another thing he loved to do was to play his fiddle, and he would play it for Jesus. He would sit there in front of the Blessed Sacrament in the church, and he would fiddle away. Venerable Solanus Casey, Blessed Solanus Casey. He certainly had major human limitations, but he was filled so much with God's grace that his life became like a roaring waterfall, spreading God's goodness. He certainly is one of many, many great examples that we have as a church of a true disciple on the way. Now, maybe most of us here, when we read about the lives of these wonderful saints, men and women, we say, I could never be like that. That's so hard to do. But it isn't hard to do if we really ask the Lord to help us with that. Last week we gave you these booklets. We ask you again to look at those prayer opportunities, look at those faith formational opportunities, because as disciples on the way, that's how we become saints, by being a people of prayer, by opening our hearts and minds always to Jesus. And if that Holy Spirit prompts you to fill out that sheet that also is in the booklet as well, to be more intentional in your discipleship with Jesus Christ, and placing those sheets in those boxes that are out there in the narthexes as well. So again, as we wind this month down and finish this discipleship time until we do this again in January with ministry, again, I'm prayerfully inviting you to fully enter in with our diocese, as well as within this parish, to truly become holy, engaged in Jesus Christ, in your relationship with him and his church, and to live out that mission of the new evangelization. So let us now pray together once again that beautiful prayer that the diocese has given to us as we say,
Come, Holy Spirit, we ask you to renew the diocese of Green Bay and St. Pius X Parish, and make of us a community of missionary disciples. Fill our marriages, homes, and families with the love of Jesus and love for one another. Renew our priests and parish leaders with a zeal for souls. Invigorate the diocese with many new vocations to the priesthood and consecrated life. Fill our churches, our classrooms, and our faith communities with many followers, eager to be sent on mission to live and share the gospel. Help us to impact our communities with the joy of the gospel, especially by serving those in greatest need. Amen. May the Lord make us holy, fully engaged, and fully alive, and may the Sacred Heart of Jesus and the Immaculate Heart of Mary always be praying for us. Amen.